Lori Bitter joined us for an interview recently and opened our eyes to the unique phases of the 50 to 65 plus market. It may not be what you think. She brings a researcher's instincts to understanding our unpredictable generation. Through her firm, The Business of Aging, she provides strategic consulting, research, and development for companies seeking to engage with mature consumers. She serves as publisher of Grand, the digital magazine for grandparents. Her book, The Grandparent Economy, is now available. She was president of J. Walter Thompson's Boomer division, JWT BOOM, the nation's leading mature market advertising and marketing company. Prior to that, she led client service for AgeWave Impact. She is the contributor to 5 books on aging consumers and is a leader in research on topics relevant to the senior and boomer population. This is the first of 2 parts of our interview with Lori.
When I got out to San Francisco, I did a spin through Kaiser Permanente, and then a friend who'd worked with me at Kaiser had gone to work for Ken Dykewald at AgeWave. And she said, you really should, there's some job openings, you should really think about coming over here. I hadn't really thought about an aged-focused agency until then. But I had thought about the fact that I was getting, I was 40 and I was like, I didn't know very many people between the ages of 40 and 50 in the advertising business at the time. This might be a place I could hang out for a while and continue my advertising career. So I went over to AgeWave and was there for 6 years and ended up running client service for AgeWave Impact, Ken's agency. And then when Ken closed that agency, J. Walter Thompson hired me to run JWT BOOM, which was their boomer-focused agency in New York and San Francisco. And so that went on for a number of years. And then the recession hit. And unfortunately, in 2008, the majority, we had a pretty diversified client portfolio, but the majority of the work we were doing at the time was in age-targeted housing. So it was 50-plus targeted country club communities. It was continuing care retirement communities. And these were all real estate models where an older adult would have to sell a home in order to be able to buy into a community. And we all know what happened with real estate in 2008. So it was a really bad time for a lot of our clients. And J. Walter Thompson closed our division, worried that we would never be able to sort of recapture the market. I mean, I don't think anybody really knew what was going to happen at that point in time. So when that happened, I took the clients that were left in the agency and started my own firm called Continuum Crew. And during that point in time, we experimented with buying some actual media platforms of our own. We took over running eons.com, which was a social media platform for people 50 plus. We bought a share in a digital grandparenting magazine called Grand Magazine. We were trying to figure out if this was sort of when those media models were emerging. I mean, they were pretty new at the time. I mean, this is 10 years ago. And we wanted to know what we could learn about consumers from being part of that process. And if there were opportunities to do research with consumers by being part of those media platforms and things like that. We ended up getting out of the media business and in fact got out of the agency business because I closed Continuum Crew to really focus on consulting with companies because increasingly we needed a way to get in earlier with companies to really help inform their mature consumer strategy. What we were finding out was a lot of companies were starting up with very little research and very little knowledge about the consumer, but a really good idea technically or a really good idea medically, but no real understanding of whether consumers would take it on and embrace it and think it was a good idea. And by the time they'd get to the agency side of our business, the idea was already baked. The consumer hadn't been involved in the process. Has to market something that really, all of our experience with mature consumers said they're not going to buy this. I mean, you need to go back to the beginning. So I was really anxious to have a company that could get in much earlier in the process. And so that's why I sort of landed on this consulting model. And, I still have people that I work with in the marketing space, and I can bring in all sorts of resources when I work with companies that you would think of as traditional marketing resources, although no one's doing really traditional marketing anymore. But it was really to get in early and be able to make an impact on sort of the business model by creating a really grounded sense of understanding of the mature consumer. From the time that we got to California and started working with AgeWave until now, I've worked with just pretty close to the same research team for the last 21 years. So we have a lot of longitudinal understanding of, I can tell you where caregiving was 20 years ago compared to where caregiving is now, and what the caregiver looks like, and how they're thinking differently about taking care of an older adult than they were 20 years ago. And so, we don't only do research for companies, we do our own kind of our knowledge for knowledge's sake kind of research too, so that we're providing our clients with really sound understanding of what's going on.
And is that qualitative work or quantitative?
Qualitative and quantitative. This last study, the one that we're promoting right now, called Hacking Longevity, is started as a focus. It started with focus groups and qualitative work, and then we did a survey in January of Hacking Longevity is a three-generation look at living to be 100. So we talked to what we call today's seniors, who are the silent generation. We talked to baby boomers, and we talked to Generation X. So it's 3 generations over the age of 50 about living to 100. And sort of how they're thinking about that, what kind of plans they're making, what's important to them today, how they're spending their time, who they're spending their time with.
Your research, what would you say is a pretty common statement about each of those?
Well, it's interesting because seniors are. And I use that term loosely. I don't like to get caught up in a lot of the conversation about the language we use around older adults. But the people who are seniors today, the silent generation, are pretty content, to be honest with you. They've navigated the how am I going to finance my retirement? They've navigated where am I going to live in my retirement? They've sort of gotten over all of those hurdles, and it's sort of like their challenge now is their health. And they're very, very focused on staying healthy for as long as possible. They're ironically the most optimistic of the 3 generations about aging, which I think is pretty interesting. The baby boomers were a real mixed bag, as you might expect.
Right.
They say they're thinking a lot about their health and they're thinking a lot about their finances, but when you drill down into what they are actually doing to mitigate the problems or to try to solve for their own retirement, they really aren't making movement. They're thinking about it. Whether that means they're talking to their financial planners, whether it's not unlike things like exercise and health that we've heard baby boomers pay lip service to in the past, but not really execute on. There seems to be a place where they're not jumping off and and sort of actually doing something with the information they have. They are worried about their retirement. They're thinking about how they're going to live, where they're going to live, how they're going to finance their retirement. They're thinking about how long they're going to have to work. They think about their bucket lists quite a bit, like kind of what are those dreams not realized, and so how they're going to spend their time. It's really interesting. We did AARP was one of the backers for this research, and for their Living 100 event in April, we did a timeline of inflection points, like when we saw key things happening along this timeline, and there's a place at about 53, 54, 55 where people seem to flip a switch from worrying about finances and their financial health in older age to their physical health in older age. And certainly boomers have flipped that switch to their physical health, but the majority will tell you that they don't have any clue what they're going to do about their financial health. It's almost like they sort of just resigned themselves to it's going to be what it's going to be. They don't feel like they can impact it anymore. It was a really interesting point in time to look at. Then you get to Generation X, and if I could say one thing about comparing Gen X to baby boomers is Generation X is sort of where baby boomers were 15 years ago with caregiving and the responsibilities of caregiving and the crunch of, needing to get promoted, needing to make more money. Their kids are getting older, so college is in front of them. They may be on second marriages now. So they're sort of in that state of chaos that baby boomers were 10 to 15 years ago.
And that revolves around work and money.
Work, money, and caregiving. I mean, the caregiving numbers in this generation are pretty overwhelming, just like they were for baby boomers back when boomers were taking care of the World War II cohort. This generation is being asked to, step up and take care of aging parents, and they're a different generation than baby boomers, where baby boomers sort of felt like baby boomers sort of felt a responsibility to their parents and to take care of their parents. This generation is a lot more pragmatic. They're willing to take responsibility and help provide care, but they seem to have more of a sense of their need to balance that with their family life, and they're frustrated. There's a lot of frustration. They are the most worried and the least content. But again, you might imagine that. I mean, at this age, they've got that whole confluence of life events happening to them right now. All the pressures of what I call, they've adapted to adulting, and now adulting is hard. It's not like being in your 30s where you're just kind of trying to figure out how to pay all the bills and buy a house and be married and all of those things. They're past that, and now they're figuring out that all this part of adult life is just really tough. And it's when we went back and did qualitative interviews, we saw Gen Xers who had older adults living with them. We saw a lot of yours, mine, and ours households in terms of kids, which is tough to navigate. So, there's a lot going on in their lives.
We're zooming in on work life for people from 50 to 65, let's say. Mm-hmm. And what changes in there. And what I hear is with the boomers, that 55-year point, if they have been thinking seriously about, I better start saving and doing things in my career to make that happen, that lasts until about 55. And then from that point on, would you say they resign themselves to their place in the world and and they're going to see if they can stay standing long enough to make it to retirement.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people say 70 or 71 is their retirement goal. There's a segment of boomers who are starting businesses and say that they want to start something that will be become a family business. But a lot of those businesses that are being started are solo entrepreneur businesses. They're consulting back to the industries they came from. There are a lot of great numbers about boomers starting businesses that are employing a lot of people, but a lot of those are doing the work I do, which is solo work, or partnering with companies to provide services. So that's not a certain particularly stable source of income. So
consultant business.
Right. So a lot of them are still they're still trying to bridge to what I call the bridge to retirement. They're trying to get from their late 50s to their 70s. They've got this 10 to 12 year gap they have to fill with some kind of income. And we saw in this research a lot of people trying to figure out how to get there. And a lot of people doing the trade-offs, like, really looking at their tax situation and their assets. We saw a lot of couples doing this where they were both working and they were both just slogging through, just trying to make it 5, 6, 7 more years, and stepping back and looking at their tax liability and their assets and going, okay, there may be a better way. Maybe one of us should stop working and go do this. And, we'll sell the house. And so we saw a lot of this interesting sort of trading off behavior. How do we make other kinds of changes that aren't just finding more work or aren't going out to look for work?
Right. And then those people who are in their careers and are starting to see ageism or there's no place for them that there once was.
Yeah.
What's happening inside the workplaces to address that? I know we're coming upon a shortage of workers and some more ways to deal with that. What do you see?
Well, it's interesting because I've had a chance recently to talk to recruiters, and even though some of the very high-end recruiters know that older employees are right for a lot of the positions they have open, when they put them forward, they just come up against a wall. And I think there are a lot of things going on here. Back in the early days when I had the agency and we were trying to sell brands on marketing to baby boomers, we were fighting an uphill battle with 30-year-old media planners.
Right.
Well, I think some of that is happening in the workforce. I think the people who are occupying the chairs in HR are young. I think a lot of people in the agencies who are placing people in jobs are young. And I think there is a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of myth around older workers. For example, I just had a table full of 30-somethings in my house all weekend long because there was a big festival up here in Napa for the weekend. And so I heard one of the young women say, well, I know for the company I'm in, people would be worried about healthcare costs of older workers and how expensive older workers are to have on the payroll because they just have a lot more healthcare costs. And I said, do you think an older worker is more expensive than women who are childbearing years?
Right.
And there was this big long pause. And they were like, oh, well, I hadn't really thought about it that way. And I said, well, young women having children are far more expensive on a company's healthcare dollars than any other worker, other than someone having open heart surgery. childbearing is a much bigger burden if people will step back and look at where their healthcare dollars are going. I said, but the whole idea of pooled risk is meant to mitigate that. I mean, so there's just the young people's understanding of what goes into the cost of a worker it's just not there.
Right.
I mean, they don't understand it, and it's not their fault. They haven't had the life experience to understand it. But shame on the companies who are hiring these people and putting them in positions and not training them, and not getting them the right kind of information about a worker. I mean, it's you may be able to hire back a 65-year-old consultant who's already, they're already Medicare eligible. They've already navigated their health care at 65. And they're not going to be any sort of insurance burden on the company. I mean, people don't get it.
Well, do you see any programs that are being formulated to address that?
I personally see a lot of blogs and a lot of conversation about it. And I know some really smart people who talk about it a lot. But I don't see anything going on the HR side to specifically say, here's why we need more older workers in our workforce, and here's what they really cost us. I don't see that, but I'm not in that, I'm not in that world full time. Yeah. A lot about diversity in the workforce, and right. and increasingly I'm seeing aging as part of the diversity conversation, which I find fascinating.
Mm-hmm. The fact that you have to have a conversation about women in the workforce is also amazing, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I do think that HR professionals who really know their stuff know that an age-diverse workforce is a stronger workforce. There is something older people can learn from younger generations. There are always things younger generations can learn from older workers. And I think it takes a really smart CEO and a really good HR department to know how to navigate that and how to not have age be an issue. I mean, it shouldn't be an issue any more than black, white, male, female should be an issue. But we all know that those things happen in the workforce. And I think it's good that there's lots of conversations going on. I felt like people were doing more than having conversations and writing books about it. There was actually some feet on the ground, something happening there.
In part 2 of this interview, Lori discusses intergenerational mentoring, technology for older workers, the aftershocks of the Great Recession, living solely on Social Security, an epidemic of single retired women living on a single Social Security check, and what marketers can learn about speaking to this demographic. Lori is a speaker for the Silicon Valley Boomer Venture Summit, which takes place June 20th and 21st in Berkeley, California. The summit is a gathering of venture capitalists, angel investors, entrepreneurs, and corporate executives focused on the longevity economy. Thank you for joining us on Next For Me Interviews. Find out more and subscribe to our free weekly newsletter at nextforme.com.